Let me ask you a very personal question. What does Hindu culture mean to you? More specifically, as a second-generation immigrant. How does that compare with what your parents view as Hindu culture? Can you relate the two?
We'll explain that what you think of as Hinduism isn't necessarily the only way of doing things. And there may be other ways that you might be better suited to. And it's maybe a bit controversial. But so think back to school. Some of you might remember taking chutney sandwiches or idli in your lunchbox, and other people might have looked at you really weirdly, being like, "Oh, what's that smell? I don't want. Oh, can you? Yeah, no, I'll just go back to my boring cheese and stale bread. I don't want any of that exciting stuff." And at that point, your culture might have made you feel a bit alienated, because you're surrounded by people from a different culture, right? People who grew up with a different environment. But as you get older, especially when you go to university, some of you might find that you begin to latch on to those parts of your culture that you previously might have not thought of. Your culture becomes your identity, and it's really nice. You get empowered by going to Hindu Soc events, or just listening to talks or talking about your culture to other people. And the point I'm trying to make here is everybody's version of culture is different, right? Yours is different to mine, my parents is different to mine, and people have different experiences. So I have really strong memories of really nice, warm memories when I think about culture. I remember every month in my house we'd do an arti, or at Diwali we'd go to the temple. Like being Maharashtrian, we tend to be a bit less ritualistic. We don't really care as much, so to speak. But we'd go to the temple for big occasions like Diwali or Ganpati. And I have really warm memories because for me, moving around, personally, Hinduism was the one constant in my life. But for other people, that might have been a bad experience. Like one of my friends, I remember she says she likes to believe in a higher power, spiritual power or something, but she doesn't like the idea of Hinduism because she remembers being made to go to the temple every single weekend, and just doing things her parents were telling her to. She remembers random aunties gossiping about her and telling her what she can and can't wear, when she can go into the temple, when she can't go into the temple. So they weren't really nice memories, and for her personally, that made her almost reject her own culture. And at the end of the day, guys, we look like what we look, right? Culture is going to be an inherent part of us, and to throw that away, I think, is such a waste because there's so much other stuff out there. Now, what we have to remember, this talk is mostly aimed towards second generation people. And by second generation, if you don't know what that means, your parents came to this country. You might have been born here or you might have grown up here. But essentially, your parents came to this country, and with them, they took an idea of what culture means to them. Whether that meant going to the temple, whether that meant being super religious or believing in certain gods. But then that was a factor of how they grew up, right? Like, they are how they are because of how they grew up, who their friends were, what their parents were like, the environment around them. So for them to impose that culture on you and you to just get along with that culture straight away, it doesn't make any sense at all, right? Your life is a combination of many different factors which are different to your parents. So you can't assume that what your parents believe in is the best thing for you. And personally, my parents are very religious. They're not super orthodox religious, but I agree with a lot of what they believe in, but there are some parts of it which just doesn't make sense to me. It's kind of like at university. I'm a very scientific person. I did engineering. But if somebody forced me to do English literature, I would hate it. I would hate university. So everybody's different, and everyone's version of culture is their own. And you can't really say what your parents believe in might not suit you personally, right? So what I wanted to show you is that how can you relate to your own culture? How can you embrace your culture when you don't even know exactly what it is? A lot of people who get turned away by Hinduism often do that because what they think of as Indian culture or Hinduism is in fact what their parents believe in, and it just doesn't suit them. Okay, but you may be compatible with some other way of thinking. So the point of this talk is I just want to show you all the different other ways of being a Hindu, or shall I say, ways that you can embrace your culture, embrace your religion, at the same time as being part of your culture, at the same time as believing in something different from what your parents believe in. So that's the whole aim of this talk, okay? And at any point, if you don't agree with anything I say, you can reject it. Because that's the whole point of Hinduism, is if somebody tells you something, you don't just believe it. If you read something somewhere, don't just accept it for what it is. Think about it, process it. If it makes sense to you, only then accept it, right? If somebody quotes to you from some scripture, that's not proving the religion, is it? All that's proving is their ability to read and speak. So think about what they say. If it makes sense to you, accept it. And if it doesn't, reject it. So that, to me, is what Hinduism is about. It's about the power of rational thought. So when I was at university, I was president of the Hindu Cultural Society, and I used to get really annoyed because people used to come up to me and they used to say, "Oh, how come you're drinking alcohol? Isn't that forbidden?" Or, "Why aren't you vegetarian? That's forbidden in Hinduism." I used to laugh a bit because nothing is really forbidden in Hinduism. It's sometimes culture, or Indian culture, which might forbid things sometimes. And often when people look down on you, it's not their fault, it's just how they've been brought up. And so as a result, Hinduism, or what I'm going to call conventional Hinduism, is quite exclusionary. So all I mean by that is, it might feel like sometimes if you don't believe in what the majority of the people believe in, it's almost like you're a bad Hindu. And that's definitely not the case. And I think something I might be telling you which is different to what you've heard so far is, I'll be referring to what I call conventional Hinduism, right? And by that I mean whatever you see around you. So someone might say, "Oh, my mom goes to the temple every weekend and only prays to Krishna." Some people might say, "Oh, I always fast on Thursday, I don't eat meat on this day or that day." Or at home, we worship all these different gods, but not this one. We go to the temple in the morning. And I'm not trying to say that's bad at all. Please don't get me wrong. For me, though, I needed something slightly different. I was more suited to a different way of thinking about religion. It's a personal choice. It's a personal choice. So this is what I mean by conventional Hinduism. Stuff that you see around you, things like bhakti yoga, so the aspect of Hinduism of devotion, of praying, and they're all really good things, but you may be suited to something else. I want you to treat me as kind of like a Hinduism salesman, to flick through a catalogue of the different things available to you that you might want to subscribe to. It's like pick and mix. If you don't like this idea, don't take it. If you don't like Equality Street, no one likes Bounty, but some people love it. Just take what you want. So that's what I mean by conventional Hinduism. And a lot of the times, when people who call themselves real Hindus, or people who say that you're not a real Hindu if you do certain things, they're driven by some misconceptions, even by the ones that really believe in what they believe in. There's also lots of misconceptions for people who aren't Hindus. Like, I'm sure people have asked you, "Oh, how can you believe in a billion different gods?" Right? And sometimes a lot of these misconceptions come from something as simple as a mistranslation. And that mistranslation could have happened because of colonialism, could have happened because of many different reasons. But as an example, let's go through this thing, deities and gods. So when someone says, "How many gods do Hindus believe in?" we all, having been to Balaji camp, we know the answer is one, right? With the supreme consciousness, in general, we believe in that. But sometimes people will say, "Oh, there's 330 million gods." Some people will say, "Oh, there's 10 or 20. So there's such a lot of confusion there. Even for non-Hindus, they often are quite perplexed. And when you have certain words meaning, when you have confusion between translation and words, that results in, bad things happening. So in a very mathematical sense, I'm going to define God first. Okay, let's define it, because once we have that definition, we can use that to discuss the other features here. So very famous definitions of God. A God is everywhere, right? A God is everywhere, omnipresent. A God knows everything, omniscient, and also a God is omnipotent. So that means a God can do anything he, she, or it wants. And that's quite a standard definition in many religions, and in fact, that's a good definition to apply to the supreme consciousness, the highest God, shall we say, in Hinduism. But then there's always a difference. In stories, in the Hindu stories and scriptures, you come across Shiva, Ganpati, Indra, Agni, and quite often they are bound by promises. Yeah? In stories, what happens is people pray to them for thousands of years. They come down to earth and say, oh, I'm really happy with you. You can have whatever you want. You may have a wish. Yeah? And these are called devas. And devas in English, we call them deities. And I'm making a distinction here because they're a superior race of beings. They have advanced technology. They have super weapons, Wi-Fi, nuclear explosions, all that kind of stuff. It's all written in the scriptures. The point I'm trying to make is, because they're bound by promises and worship, because they have to do certain things, they can't be omnipotent. So this happens quite a lot in many of the stories. A bad guy, I hope you can read that, right? A bad guy will meditate for thousands of years, and because that's how they lived that long back then. Meditate for thousands of years. Some deity like Indra will come down and say, oh, I'm really happy with you. You may ask me for whatever you want. And they end up saying stuff like, well, can you make it so that I can't be killed in the nighttime nor in the daytime? I can't be killed inside the house or outside the house, neither by a man nor a beast, all this kind of stuff, basically to try and be immortal. And then in these stories, usually, the devas then have to find a technical loophole. So they often go to like Vishnu or one of the supreme devas, and Vishnu's like, so chill guys, I studied law, we can work out a technicality. So then Vishnu becomes half man, half beast. He goes to the porch of the house, which is neither inside nor outside, at twilight, which is neither night or day. So they find these technicalities to kill the bad guy. And the point I'm trying to make here is, the devas are bound by promises. They have to do certain things, they have to follow certain laws. And so they can't be omnipotent, and so they can't be God, or the highest thing. Now this might seem quite crazy that I've just suggested, like, oh, Vishnu isn't the highest being, or Ganpati is not a god. Well, no one's really arguing with that. Because we know that in Hinduism we all believe that there is a supreme consciousness, the highest power exists, and underneath the highest power, different representations of that can be thought of as our deities or gods. So I wanted to make a point here that there's some misconceptions between words getting translated differently, and the reason for this, in the case of gods versus deities, the people who translated them. So many of the Hindu texts were translated into English, right? And I'm quite glad that they were, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do all this research, because I don't read Sanskrit, and not a lot of people do read Sanskrit or understand it. But the people who translated these Hindu texts firstly had no concept of devas or the hierarchy of superior beings that we have. They also didn't have the concept of the deep philosophies in Sanskrit, which are really old. So when they translated the Indian text, the Hindu texts, they did so in a very Western-centric, Christian-centric point of view. So the drawing I've just shown you, on the left-hand side, and everyone can see the screen, so yeah, on the left-hand side, that's like a very Christian-centric view of humans versus God. There's humans there, and there's God. There's nothing in between. So then when these people translated Hindu texts, they had no way of fully understanding, well, what does it mean if you have humans, then you have some supreme beings from a different world who have Wi-Fi and all this kind of stuff, and many other things, and then a supreme God? How does that work? And that's why they translated the deities as gods, because they were very similar to Greek mythology. And in fact, you might say they're actually the same gods in Greek mythology. So the point I'm making here is that because of translation, we call them gods, because of translation into English. And through colonialism, quite often, even today, people in India today also call them gods when talking in English, but there is a difference between the deities, the devas, and our supreme consciousness. So a lot of the places where these deities like Indra and Agni appear are in the Vedas. And I hope you've heard of the Vedas, and if you haven't, they are meant to be the foundation stone for all of the Hindu philosophies out there. Well, most of them anyway. And they're written so long ago, they were either written by some humans and written so long ago that we don't know who wrote them, or they were said to have been revealed to the great sages. Now, who wrote them doesn't matter at all. It's the fact that they're so old that nobody ever even knows. And in these Vedas, if you've ever tried to read them, which, firstly, I don't think many people have. Now, all Christians will have read the Bible, at least even a bit, or all Muslims will have read a bit of the Quran, but if we say the Vedas are like so important in Hindu philosophy, how come none of us have ever read them? And the answer is they're quite dense, they're quite difficult for regular people to read. And that's why traditionally it's no, you can't really understand them unless you're spiritually advanced, like a sage or a swami. But thanks to modern technology, if you download the app, you can read all the Vedas you want. And I encourage you just to do that, just to have a go. And you'll quickly find that it's not spiritual guidance. It's not like, you should do this, you should do that. It's nothing like that. The Vedas are full of hymns and rituals for these elemental deities. So an example would be, oh Indra, please come down to earth and offer this, accept this sacrifice, and then vanquish my enemies. Or Agni, who's Lord of Fire. It's like, oh Agni, please come and, I don't know, burn my enemies, or something like that. Basically hymns and rituals for these elemental forces or gods, whatever you want to call them. And they're a bit like the Greek gods. In fact, there's lots of similarities there. And I'm not a historian, but the gist of it is that there was a group of nomads, a group of people living in sort of Central Asia, long, long time ago. And they were a nomadic community. They liked to believe in elemental forces of nature, Mother Earth, fire, water, rain, and they even personified them to some extent because they needed them. You know, they were a farming society, they were a nomadic society, and half of those people went north into Europe and became, later on, Nordic civilizations and the ancient Greeks, which is why there's quite a lot of similarities between Odin, Thor, Norse gods, and the Greek gods like Zeus and stuff. And the other half went eastwards and mingled with the people in the Indus Valley, or whatever was there at the time, and they brought with them these deities, Indra, Agni, Vayu. So Indra, king of the gods, right? He lives in a special place. He's god of rain and thunder. So is Zeus, right? We have Varuna, who's god of the oceans and the sea, who has a trident and rides a fish. They have Poseidon. It's the same. It's exactly the same people, the same advanced race of beings. And if you, hopefully a lot of you have seen Marvel movies. If you've seen Thor: Dark World, I really enjoyed it because at one point Thor is explaining that there are 9 different realms, and one of them is Earth, and the Asgardians, we are a race of advanced beings with advanced warfare, and to Earth people, we seemed like gods. So that interpretation kind of resonated with me. Look, whether it's true or not, does it matter? I think it's cool. But Thor might have had 9 realms. We in Hinduism have 14 different realms. And so the point is, these are deities. These are elemental forces, elemental gods, and they're different from the supreme consciousness. And that's what the Vedas are all about. The Vedas don't contain anything like the gods you've heard of, Brahma, Ganpati. They all came afterwards, right? So the Vedas, have a go at reading them. It's quite dense to understand, but there's some really weird and interesting concepts as well. So one of my favourite bits of the Vedas is called the Hymn of Creation. Now, I don't want to get all preachy on you, but in Christianity, even if you're not a Christian, we probably all know how the world was formed, right? God created the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th. And similar stuff with the other Abrahamic faiths as well. But the Hymn of Creation in the Rig Veda basically says, and it's a bit cryptic, so bear with me, in the beginning, there was nothing. There was no existence, and there was no non-existence. See, it already doesn't make any sense, but bear with me. There was neither time, there was nothing anywhere. And then suddenly, everything expanded from one point, like rays of light in all directions. And then it keeps going on to say, oh, the mountains were created, and the earth, and blah, 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 blah. Creation is lovely, pretty birds, and that kind of stuff. But at the end, it asks a really interesting question. It says, but where did all this come from? Even the deities, like Indra and Agni and stuff, even they were created afterwards. So where did everything come from? And finally it says, maybe the supreme consciousness knows where it came from, or maybe it does not. And when I first came across that kind of blew my mind, because if the Vedas are meant to be the foundation for the Hindu philosophies, how is it that it just asks even more questions? And I love that, because I think for me that encompasses what I think Hinduism is all about. Just this idea of always asking questions, always trying to make sense of the world around you. This idea of rational thought, not just believing something because it's written down somewhere, but only accepting it if it makes sense to you. So then if you have this wonderful Vedas and the high-level philosophy and all that kind of stuff, then how do you relate that to people who are often saying like, oh, this is forbidden, or you shouldn't eat meat because it says so, or all that kind of stuff? How does it relate to that? And the reason is there are two types of texts, two types of scriptures. And whenever somebody quotes you something, whenever someone says, oh, but it says, thou shalt do this, always ask them where they've got their information from. Yeah. So the first type of scripture is called a Shruti text. All that means is it wasn't written by humans, or that's what they say anyway. Whether you want to believe it is a different matter. So it's things like the Vedas or the Upanishads, and they're meant to provide spiritual guidance. Yeah. It doesn't say you should do this, you should do that. Nothing. And the Vedas are an example of that. The other type of texts are called Smriti texts, and they were written by humans. No one's doubting this. They were written by human authors, and they were intended to be laws of the land for society at that time. Remember, at that time being the operative word here. And these Smriti texts are often quite full of contradictions, which is just exactly as you'd expect by something written by humans, right? So when people say, oh, it's forbidden, they're probably quoting a Smriti. And remember, when somebody is quoting something from you, it's up to them what they want to show you, right? Okay, so for example, I'm going to show you two quotes from Smriti texts. If I wanted, I could show you some amazing things about Hinduism, amazing quotes. I could also show you quotes that put Hinduism in a very bad light. So I have the power here, but it's up to you to whether you want to believe me or not, or whether you want to do more research, okay? So the first bit, oh, and the other thing, sorry, I forgot to say this. The Smriti texts, there were lots of them, but when the British Empire came to India, or when it became there, they saw that these Smriti texts were written. They were already, someone had written them down, and they said, oh, this is an easy way, let's just use these, let's just enforce these to control the local population. And they used these texts, especially the Manusmriti is one of the types of Smritis. They used these texts to enforce the law. And some of that has percolated down through society even today, even 70 years after colonialism ended. And so people are still, they still have these feelings of this is forbidden, or a real Hindu should be doing this or that. And sometimes that might come from the Smriti text being penal codes. It's a long time ago, right? But it's still there in today's society. So here's an example. There's a really good bit in the Manusmriti which gives it says basically, be vegetarian. And it says so quite a few times. It says if you don't be vegetarian, if you eat meat, you're a bad Hindu, or you're a bad person, rather. That's exactly what it says there. But then there are also other things in the Manusmriti. For example, there's lots of bad stuff. So if a woman was to hear any of like Vedic knowledge, molten glass should be poured into her ears, right? People often pick and choose. But there's also some really nice stuff in Smriti texts. So there's another Smriti called the Shatpad Brahman, and that Smriti text talks lots about vegetarianism. It says why vegetarianism is so good for the planet on an environmentally friendly approach as well, not just like a religious thing. In fact, it's not a religious thing. But it also gives you a large chapter on why you should respect the cow. And I don't need to go over that because everyone, you all know that. You've probably heard that from previous lectures. But, you know, a cow gives you so much, provides you with so much food. A cow is like a mother. All that kind of stuff. Really well written, really strong arguments. And throughout the book, there is this character called Sage Yagnikos. He's like this big rishi, big sage. At the end of that chapter, though, on why you should respect cows, he says that. Now, I'm not saying you should eat beef at all, right? In fact, I don't eat beef, but I don't eat beef because I think it's better for the environment. Yeah. The point I'm making here is there's contradictions everywhere in texts. And when people tell you something authoritatively, saying this is what it means to be a Hindu, take it with a pinch of salt. If it's from a Smriti text, just take it with a pinch of salt. Do a bit more research. And if it makes sense to you, for example, about the whole beef thing. I don't eat beef. I thought about it, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm eating other animals, then it doesn't make sense. Like chickens give me eggs as well. I wear wool from sheep. So it doesn't make sense for me not to eat beef. But then I thought a bit more. I said, well, think about the other aspect, the other effect that eating meat has, which is a negative effect on the planet. And so I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to I could cut out some meat and that would be good for the planet, and that's why I stopped eating beef. It's a very personal thing. If it makes sense to you, do it. So again, the point I'm trying to make here is, if people quote you something, don't just believe it straight away. Think about it, do a bit more research, and if you agree with it, great for you. And if you don't, just reject it. So I've talked a lot about conventional Hinduism being one thing and me giving you an option to do something else, but what are these different options? And if you've studied Hindu philosophies, you'll know that there are 6 major philosophies you could be part of. And I just wanted to very quickly summarize and give you like a little flavor of what all of them are. Very oversimplified, obviously. You could have a lecture on each of these. But I wanted to show you the other things that are out there. And what you think of as Hinduism isn't necessarily all there is, okay? So there's 6 different types. I don't want you to memorize this at all, okay? I just want to show you. Remember, treat me like a salesman. So this is the first one. All of these, by the way, believe in karma. So all of these believe in the fact that if you do any action, whether it's good or bad, that's going to have some effect or some consequence on your life or your next life. And all of these also believe in the concept of rebirth, reincarnation, and finally escaping that cycle of rebirth and death. So all of these believe in that, but the specifics differ. So this is the first one. It's called Sankhya, and they don't believe in a god. There is no god controlling things like a puppet. They say that the universe just consists of 2 things intertwined: consciousness, or they call it purush, and matter / energy, they call it prakriti. And they say that the universe is just a combination of those 2 things together, and that's how everything works. And obviously I'm oversimplifying things a lot, but that's the main gist of it. And if you want to find out more, then use that word Sankhya and just type it into Google. Find out a bit more about that. The next one is called yoga, and a lot of people have heard of yoga, but a lot of people think it's just doing poses, right? The point of yoga is self-discipline of yourself through 8 different ways to attain detachment from the world, to escape the cycle of rebirth and death, to know that everything around you is a myth. Yeah, there is no spoon, like they'd say in the Matrix. But one of those ways is by doing exercises and poses. Another way is doing meditation, another way is doing breathing control. And you can believe in a god if you want, but you don't have to. There's no one forcing you to. The third one, Nyaya, means logic. They say absolutely there is no god, there cannot be a god at all. Assuming that you believe in karma. And if you believe in karma, they give you a really concise proof why there cannot be a god. Their whole philosophy is life is full of suffering. And the only way we can end the suffering is by learning the true nature of the universe, learning about yourself, your soul. And there's different ways of doing that. This is, I quite like this one, Vaisheshika, or as I like to call it, God the Scientist. And what Vaisheshika philosophy kind of says is, there was a God, or there is a God, but the God started the whole universe, and then kind of left the forces of physics to do whatever and keep it going. Yeah? And they believe that everything can be subdivided into atoms. Now when I say atoms, I don't mean protons, things consisting of protons and neutrons. I mean in a very spiritual sense. There are different particles. And the interesting thing here is that we're used to thinking of karma as just being something good or bad that happens to us, right? But this philosophy says that every time you do an action, karma is a particle, it's a quantum particle that gets generated and it gets attached to your soul. Again, oversimplifying it, but that's what they believe. The fifth one is called Mimamsa. They say there's no God, there's only those supreme deities. Indra, Agni, Zeus, Thor, that kind of stuff. And as long as you do exactly what the Vedas say, they will be happy with you. They being the deities, yeah? It's not very popular nowadays. And the final one is called Vedanta, and most of us actually believe in this. 99% of Hindus today follow the Vedanta traditions. Even in this one, there's 2 different kinds. And most of us are called Advaitha, which means non-dualist. And the gist of that is, on the top level view, everything is part of the same consciousness. Yeah? All of our souls and all of the universe around us is just one thing. Advaita, non-dual. That means There are no two things, only one thing. But if you follow Krishna consciousness or ISKCON or Hare Krishna, that movement, then you are a dualist. Advaitha, that's the second line. We are all one, meaning all of our souls are the same, but there is a distinction between us and God, or Krishna as they call it. And obviously there are some other categories that fall sort of in between as well. But the main point I want to make here is what you think of or what you see as being Hinduism around you is just 1/2 of 1/6 of the flavors of Hinduism that are out there. There's so much more that might be more suited to you. And I'm not saying you have to pick one, like you have to pick Nyaya or you have to be Sankhya. Not at all. It's a very personal journey. And personally, I like a bit of Vedanta, I like a bit of Nyaya, a bit of Sankhya here and there. Pick and choose what you want, as long as it makes sense to you, and as long as it's your own choice and nobody else can tell you what to do. So again, just to recap, the main principle is rational thought. This is what a phrase that Jay Lakhani developed, rational thought. He says that Hinduism is all about spiritual democracy. You believe in whatever makes sense to you and always listen to others and accept things only if they make sense to you, right? Don't let anyone else tell you what you can and can't do. You do your own research and that will empower yourself. In fact, if you do your own research, you have a bit more knowledge. Sometimes you can also point out when somebody is chatting nonsense, and you can actually stand firmly and not get swayed by somebody else's view. Now remember, I'm not saying that Bhakti Yoga is bad. I'm not saying that going to the temple is bad. I'm saying that it might not be suited to everybody. And that's natural, right? We're humans. We are all different. Our religion and culture is a very personal choice. So if you see your parents doing something and you like it, brilliant, right? But if there are some aspects of it which you can't quite get a grip on. For example, personally, I don't know if some of you have been to Satyanarayan pujas. So this is a puja for a deity called Satyanarayan, and it's in two parts. There's the puja part and then there's a story part. And I grew up going to a few of these, and I like the puja part because I've got good memories. It's just warm memories of a priest sitting in front of a fire doing something, and I don't have to explain it to you, but it's just nice. I think it's nice. I never liked the second part. To me, it never made sense, personally, because in the second part, the priest would always tell you a story about how such and such person promised a god they would do the puja, they forgot, and then they died. Or somebody said, sure, I'll give money to charity after the puja. They didn't, they died. If you didn't do the puja, you die. If you do the puja, he got money. So the point of that was to achieve to a mass population. And how do you do that to a mass population? Well, you have to have some kind of rigid structure. So there's always reasons for it. But personally, I didn't enjoy that, so I didn't subscribe to it. But I'd still go to those pujas. My parents went, and they loved it. And so, yeah, you do you. The most important thing I want to say is listen to new ideas. But this is a way of still grabbing hold of your culture without feeling like you can't put you and your parents together. Because your parents' view on culture is different to you. It has to be. It can't be the same. But this way you can at least latch onto it, be empowered by what you believe in. And at the end of the day, it's your own choice. So with that in mind, I just want to thank you all for listening, and we should discuss. If anyone has anything to say, I think there's some stuff in the comments. Please feel free. Let's have a discussion. So thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you so much, Aalok. That was really, really interesting. If people have any questions, then feel free to either unmute yourself or to pop them into the chat, whatever you prefer. So it says, when it comes to doing research, given that we have to rely on translations, what's your view on the reliability of translated Hindu texts or their authenticity to the original meaning?
Okay, that's a great question. Now, seeing as I don't speak Sanskrit myself, all I have to rely on are these translated texts. But what I can do is then look at commentaries. So if you find, something worth reading actually are the Upanishads.
and you can get good translated versions, translated by Indian people who knew Sanskrit as well, by the way. They have really nice commentaries in there. And I'm not saying believe them at all as well. I'm saying gather your evidence from everywhere and then make an informed decision yourself. So yes, if they're in English, like I guess there's always that danger of there's a mistranslation there, but you have to just trust yourself and read as much as you can. Okay, so by conventional Hinduism, so someone said, what do you mean by conventional Hinduism? So I said, if you imagine what you're, in general, I'm making an assumption here that most of us or most of our families are conventional Hindus in the sense that we do pujas, we do artis, we go to temples, and ideally you worship one or two different deities. That's conventional Hinduism in my own words. It's not like a term that already exists. It's just something I'm using to distinguish it from this idea of taking bits and pieces from the other Hindu philosophies. Laila said lots of good scholarship and translations have come out of chairs in Sanskrit studies from Germany. Wait, Laila, are you there? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
So I guess there's also. Oh yeah. So do you want to explain that a bit more?
Yeah, if people are interested, actually one of the top kind of, if you're interested in European studies of Sanskrit or looking for translations and materials, the top country for Sanskrit scholarship has been Germany, not England or anywhere else. But if you are looking for good translations in English, a lot of them have come out of people who have held the chair for Sanskrit studies in Oxford. So the big seminal translation of the Mahabharata came from a scholar at Oxford, just if people are interested.
Yeah, the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies is really good. That's the person who used to be in charge, I'm not sure if he's still there, Nick Sutton. He's amazing. He's written a few books, and if you see some of his talks on YouTube, they're just amazing. So I recommend that, Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. Yeah. Quickly answer Kavita's question, can't decide what is wrong and right. Firstly, I'm not a guru, I'm not a swami. So my credentials are almost none, right? All I've done is looked up on the internet, read some books, read some Upanishads, tried to make my own identity, make my own decisions. And I guess, how do you decide what's wrong and right? That's a personal choice, right? But my personal view on it, not that you guys are asking for it, but my personal view on it is, we can't help doing some bad things, right? But try to leave a net positive impact on society. I guess that's one way of looking at it. But it's a very personal idea. Yeah, go on, Adi.
Hey man, yeah. So sorry, just wanted to say some things before I leave. But yeah, so there's just a few things that I think are worth mentioning because, like you, and I'm assuming like a lot of other people, I actually went into this thing where I started thinking like, yeah, Hinduism can be literally anything, and specifically along the points that you mentioned. However, there are some, I can say that in recent years, I've learned quite a few things that made it clear that there is a rigid structure to Hinduism as well. For example, with the Smritis, it's not just that they are different, there is actually a hierarchy where Smritis, not a single, for example, mainly the Vedas, and a lot of people like to say the Bhagavad Gita is a Smriti, simply because it's present within the Mahabharata. But in fact, it was the first thing that was spoken to Suryadev, and then everyone afterwards, was passed from age to age, every yuga. So, and that's if you look at all of those, if you observe in the Vedas, for example, in the case of maybe cow eating, beef eating, right? There's not a single thing that condones it. And it's very interesting that a lot of people try to say that when you look at, no one actually questions Buddhism. Even though there's many different forms of Buddhism, each one actually intrinsically related to a culture of practice. In Hinduism, it's not like that. You have different sects, but those practices don't define what they believe. There are some, that's why in a way you can actually classify, you can compare some of those sects of belief based off of how Vedically attributed they are. So if they are, for example, aligned with the Smriti, then that's something that is supposed to be the core of Hinduism. Now, if it's something that is a bit more extravagant, and there's a lot of beef eaters out there as well, or whatnot, okay, cool, we shouldn't denounce them, but at the same time, you should understand what that means. What is the reason people say, for example, not to eat beef or any animal? It's because of two things, not just sentiment, as they said, like, oh, you should respect the cow, mother cow, and all that. No, it's that one, it's an emotionally intelligent being. Two, we don't need meat. Three, you can get more out of the cow from a mutual symbiotic relationship than just killing it, right? So when we, like you saying, for example, in the about section of this event, it's rational thought that we like to have. But a lot of these things just slip through the cracks because people don't go through them. Yeah. And it's also worth mentioning that there are distinctions between, like you said, people have to follow the gurus of Hinduism because otherwise our interpretations might not be apt. And then even then we're sort of listening to what they say. Well, there's a distinction even there. There are some gurus who are not really bona fide acharyas, and some of them are. Now, it's worth noting that, for example, Adi Shankaracharya would be an example, it's not just in his name. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would be another example, it's not in his name. One was more focused on Vedanta, the other one was more focused on Bhakti Yoga. But they also, they condoned going around and engaging in debates with everyone, because that's the only way you'd be able to combat people's logic. So that's why for that case, I wanted to bring up, for example, the case of beef eating as an example as to how we're supposed to actually butt heads. Otherwise, people, it would be difficult to find any kind of rigidity or core belief to Hinduism. Hinduism doesn't mean anything, and everyone will just call it a way of life. So that's all I really wanted to say. There is a hierarchy, and there are some things that are very rigid. And as you said, the Smritis are very, very much about interpretation as per different ages. Even the Manusmriti, even that. But why? Because that was a material application of Hinduism. And according to what we believe, according to what all the sects believe, in the Kali Yuga, you don't have the leniency, you don't have the time to be a scholar, to even be a poetic interpreter. And then even if you are wrong, going back and revising it, you don't have that time. They advise you to go back to the very fundamentals, which is the Gita and the Vedas. And the Gita is supposed to be understood as the essence of the Vedas. And that's sort of like your shortcut. So I think it's worth looking at things from that perspective that, it is a religion for a reason. There are things that are regimented. And if we just treat Hinduism as something that is like, oh, anyone can do anything, well, it's one of the biggest reasons why we've been so manipulated for 200 years by indologists, which is the last point I'll make. If the things you read are mistranslated, which they have been, they were intentionally done so by indologists. Even, I can't remember his name, Mueller, I think, the German guy. He was the only one to try and publish a manuscript apologizing for what they did. So I'll just give three names that I think you would really love reading. One, they're David Frawley, Stephen Knapp, and Francois Gautier. These are the three Westerners, the only ones, apart from Maria Wirth in Germany, who are quite correct with their translations. And I'll type them in the chat for you guys.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if you can type them in the chat. Yeah, that's a really, really good comments. And I think everyone, yeah, someone else? What?
Nice to meet you guys.
If I could just rebut in a sense, kind of in the spirit of what Aalok was saying, in the kind of Hindu spirit of like debating and discussing and free thought, would it not be more accurate then to, because I'm kind of more in line with what Aalok was suggesting there with realizing the almost free choice aspect, whereas I see what Adi is saying. Would it not be more accurate to suggest then that the Hindu identity is an umbrella encompassing many different religious thought systems, which would naturally have rigidities, but it is up to the individual Hindu, however one defines it, to accept any one of those specific schools?
Yeah.
Or not, of course.
They can be. And like, that's how we operate, right? That's why everyone is supposed to be in harmony with each other. It's called the Sanatana Dharma umbrella. Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, they all fall under this. Even some people who are very loosely attached to Hinduism, but they focus on a very narrow set of practices. The idea is that when you, all of these different sects, there is something to it. Like I said before, they should be attributed more to Smriti or Sruti, okay? If it's to the latter, then okay, we're in much better hands. That's undisputed. If it's not, okay, so be it. Let's look at what they practice. And the thing is, these are simply manners. It's sort of like this, right? Now, I'm a Bhakti yogi, essentially, if you were to say that, right? I can also go into Kriya Yoga. There's nothing against that, right? But if I choose to do that almost explicitly, that is my choice depending on what I think is necessary for this point in time. That's why I mentioned the Kali Yuga, because they say that, you know, Bhakti Yoga is actually the most important thing you should do right now because we don't have the leniency. Now, you can go into Bhakti, which is actually more in line with conventional Hinduism. Devotional service is an example of material things you do that have spiritual value, right? You need to measure how much spiritual value do your practices have. So it's okay to have all these different things, and all of them are accepted under Sanatana Dharma. However, to say that they're all the same is ridiculous. There has to be some sort of framework, right? And I've already provided some of the reasons why there is a framework. And therefore, you know, it is possible to compare and contrast these things. And it's completely up to you. It's all your discretion as to how you want to undergo something. But again, they're practices. And you can even believe the same thing, but practice it differently. And that's one of the elements of logic when it comes to Hinduism, what you choose and why is it best. Think like an engineer, basically.
Okay. Just to add on to that point about one more, Adi, I'm not going against what you're saying, but another thing that I just remembered was there's a question that you should ask living in the UK. Why is it so taboo to eat horse meat? You can't get horse meat anywhere. Why is it so difficult? And one interpretation of this is that Britain was built on horses. The farming here was done by horses. And so it made no sense to kill them or eat the meat of that. But to draw a parallel, in India, the farming was never done by horses. It was done by cattle. So maybe there could be another reason for the whole beef thing. But again, that's just a speculation, and you'll feel free to do your own research about that. Okay. I can't see the chat anymore, so if there are any more questions, if anyone wants to just chime in. Any comments? Or if anyone wants to share their own experience with culture, religion, and how they've tried to fit into this.
Hi, Alok. This is Manisha. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Hi. So, I'm not a Cambridge University student, so I kind of just came here by invite. But I really did like the presentation, especially how you ended on and really focused on rational thought. I think that's something very important. But I was wondering, if ever you've had the experience of, I guess, the other side of the story where a lot of Hindus who read text, who understand text, are almost pushed out of the game. I myself, I am an engineer, but I'm also a writer, and I was banned because my book focused on Hinduism, and it gave this similar picture that you showed in your presentation. But I found my way, so I ain't complaining. But I was just wondering if that's something you've ever experienced. I guess it's sometimes termed as Hinduphobia, and if there's something you may have to share about it, or a good way to maybe combat it. I don't know.
Sorry, you might have cut out in the most important bits. Are you saying that, have I experienced other people going away saying that they don't want to be associated with Hinduism?
Yeah, well, kind of pushing back on you and your ideology because you are a Hindu, what might
definitely
sometimes be termed as Hinduphobia, and how you dealt with it, or if there is a decent, good, non-violent way to deal with it, essentially.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I went to this summer camp about Hinduism. It was Balaji camp in Birmingham, and this is actually where I got exposed to all these theoretical ideas about different darshanas of Hinduism and all that, and it was really nice. But at the same time, every morning we did yoga, and then we went into the main temple, and the priests were doing the puja. So I always found that contradiction there. But the priests were very focused on the devotional side of things, and they loved it, and that's really great for them. And there were some kids with me, and we were only kids. We only went there to basically meet friends. The Hinduism was a bonus. And there were some kids who just didn't really care about the theoretical stuff. They were very happy believing in what their parents believed in, and that was great for them. So when I was growing up, not so much, but at university, I later, towards the end of my university, maybe third year, fourth year, I was trying to have this kind of conversation with somebody who I thought was quite open to ideas and discussion, and he was very into conventional Hinduism and Bhakti Yoga, and that's great. But I was just saying to him, like, look, I'm really grateful, I'm really happy that you've, I'm really happy that of being a Hindu, and that's great for you. But to be honest, it just doesn't work for me. It's not compatible with me. And I was expecting kind of like a nice open-ended, that's fine for you, that's fine for me. But he kind of stopped talking to me, and he organized some other dinners where he wanted just to talk about bhakti and prayers only, and no scientific and open-ended talk, which I think was targeted towards me. But that's totally fine, because again, why should I care what, with no offense to any of you, but why should I care what you guys believe, right? Religion is a very personal experience. So all I can do is just try and, all we can do is just try and have discussions. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Aalok. That was a nice response. Thank you.
Oh, Lila?
Yeah, I just wanted to chip in on the discussion aspect of kind of what Hinduism means to different people. I think my perspective is probably quite different to a lot of people's. I don't know how many people in Cambridge actually know this fact, but I'm half Hindu, half Muslim. So my dad is Hindu Brahmin out of India, and my mum is Muslim out of the West Indies. So I've always grown up with that tension in my life, and it's two religions that also have a very controversial, tense history full of bloodshed and war. So for me, religion has always been something that is more cultural than actually to do with belief systems as such, because I grew up very much knowing that if I was to pick one belief system over another, it would, I mean, my family wouldn't be annoyed, but it would feel like I was turning the back on half of myself. So the thing that has always, for me as someone who navigates two different religions and two different cultures, has been to find the commonalities between them. And I think with something like Hinduism and Islam, that can prove quite difficult, because, you know, there are so many differences, from worshipping icons to not believing in icons, to polytheism versus monotheism. But at the heart of it, all these religions, they preach the same values, and they're all about the same things. And it's all about how you live your life and how you treat the people around you. So that's the thing that I've always taken comfort in. And if I was to tell anyone what my belief system is, it would be that. It's about how we treat each other. But that's very much been informed by the belief systems on both sides of my upbringing as well. But one thing that I have always taken comfort in, even if I don't actively pray myself, is prayer as a communal ritual, as something that you do with people around you. So I will always find it comforting to be around people reading puja, and likewise to read namaz with people, or just to hear the sounds of those two communities engaging in group prayer together. And that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to share my perspective.
Thank you. That was really nice. It's a really interesting viewpoint, not viewpoint, interesting position that you find yourself in. And I think you're the first person I've met who's half Hindu, half Muslim. So it's really interesting to hear. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are coming up to.
And I just want to say, while I start with, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We're running out of time. Okay.
If we have the last couple of questions or comments, and then we'll close up, because we're just coming up to the 1 hour mark.
Yeah. Sure. Milan, I think Milan, you've said a few things. Do you want to say anything, Milan?
I've just posted some questions I thought would be good food for thought, really, and fruit for us to think about. Maybe a question we should be asking is, who actually is a Hindu? what does the Hindu identity mean? It's obviously something we can all go away and explore ourselves, but there are resources out there. You've gone through the six schools of thought, or the six main schools of thought quite nicely, so thanks, Aalok. But we haven't quite touched on Toma, and I agree, obviously that can take a long time, but it'd be good for us to explore what Toma actually is. I know, was it Adi? I think before he left, he mentioned Sanatan Dharma, which would be good to look into for those that are interested. And yeah, again, Lila mentioned values that we hold close as well. So, you know, what values do you hold close together? And I think generally what she said, and Hindus again, do hold a certain set of values close and kind of lead their lives by those.
Yeah.
Just my 2 pence, really.
Thank you. Yeah. Again, yeah, Dharma is such a complex concept to explain to fit into a tiny thing. If we had more time, obviously we could go into it. And I'm not an expert at all. I'm just here as a mouthpiece for the internet, let's say, or just things I've read up on the internet, and that made sense to me. But yeah, thank you, everyone. So just remember, if anyone tells you you can't eat meat or you can't do this or that because it says so, don't listen to them. If they explain why and you agree with their reasoning, then brilliant. But if otherwise, you know, just listen to them and try to get the good points from them. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do something just because they say otherwise you'll be a bad Hindu. There's no such thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Aalok, for a really amazing talk and some really interesting discussion afterwards from everyone who's contributed. Yeah, I agree. I think religion is a very personal thing, and there's been lots of stuff in the comments as well if anyone's interested to read more. And of course, we could never really explain a whole religion in an hour. But thank you for what you've spoken about today. And I hope it's been a thought-provoking talk for everyone else and given you a slightly different perspective on Hinduism and what it could mean to you. With this talk, we come to the end of our Hindu Soc events for this term. So we hope you've all enjoyed, even through such a crazy term that we've had this year. Have a happy Christmas and a happy New Year. And yeah, we look forward to seeing everyone back here next time as well. And hopefully we'll have some more in-person events, COVID permitting. But thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Aalok, for a really, really informative and thought-provoking talk.